So let's get cracking. The topics that we're going to cover today is around overseas nationals, overseas residents, and sources of deposit. It's a significant growth area that we're seeing here at Together, which is why we wanted to kick off our webinars, actually covering this session. We will be discussing ways in which Together can help. So some of our USPs, which is boding very well, which again is a reason why we continue to see this as a growth and a strength opportunity here for us at Team Together. We will be discussing ways in which you can refer these types of applications. So some of these cases that you'll see will come from customers who reside in higher risk countries. So what we want to do is to work through with you ways in which we can support you, but also any additional information, any questions that we might have, so that once you're ready to fully submit that application, you've answered every single question that we're going to need the answers to. We're also going to discuss our packaging requirements so that when your application is submitted through to our team, the case is very much fully packaged, ready for a full assessment, because for us it's key to get your cases moving and progressing quickly as possible. And we certainly don't want any last minute delays by new pieces of information towards the latter stage of the process. Then Rachel will be covering ways in which you can protect you and your business. So she'll be covering some fantastic content there from an anti-money laundering perspective, and also sharing with you some questions to be asking your customers to, again, give you the answers that you need in order to progress these types of cases further forward. And then at the very end, we'll be covering the questions. So as I mentioned, utilize that chat function to get as much value out of this session as possible this morning. Again, really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to join us for our first ever session this morning. So please do use that function so that we can get as much value out of this session as possible. So first step, how can Together help? Now, applications for overseas nationals are often considered complicated with other lenders in the market, but certainly not here at Together. We keep our funding solutions simple. So we do review each case in its own individual merits. So we have a fantastic underwriting team here. We have a telephony team. You have field support across the whole of the UK, but we also have direct contact with our compliance and our financial crime team to work with them on some of these complex cases so that we can get through the questions that's needed, the answers that's needed, and then in turn the information that's required to progress your case further forward. Now, we can consider applicants who reside in countries across the globe, and many different sources of deposit are considered. So some of our competitors in this space will restrict to certain countries that they're happy to lend to customers who reside in. Others, they will want the customer to actually be resident in the UK. But that is not the case for us. We could, for example, support a first-time buyer, first-time landlord who's living overseas in a high-risk country, for example. As long as it all makes sense, the case makes sense, then we can certainly help with these types of customers. Now, we can also support with our usual fantastic speedy criteria, which includes internal funding and home track valuations. So irrespective of where the customer is located, providing, say, for example, if it's a refinance or a second charge on an existing property here in the UK, we can support with internal funding if lending to a personal structure for loans up to £300,000. And we also have home track valuations available. So subject to the property type, we can consider up to 75% loan to value for purchase transactions, up to loans of £250,000. And then we've got wider criteria subject to the loan type. So we can really support with speed for these cases. But again, what we will do is work through with you the information that's needed so that you can package that case so you can achieve a speedy funding on your application. We also continue to lend to a variety of different client profile types. So this includes customers that are part of a limited company structure, support portfolio landlords, and individual borrowers. So we can support complex structures such as SIPs, SAS, trusts. Additional information will be needed for more of these complex structures, but it's definitely something that we continue to support our packaging partners, our brokers, and our customers with, because of the level of flexibility that we can assist with customer types. Now, how to refer your cases. Now, your account manager is here to help you with these applications for overseas nationals, overseas residents, before a full application is submitted. So for overseas nationals and overseas residents, we require the following information on the initial referral. So we look for proof of ID and proof of address. This does not need to be certified at this stage on the initial referral review. We also want to understand the source of the deposit, income and employment details of the applicant, and how they source the property here in the UK, and the intended use of the property. So this helps us to kind of build a profile of the customer, the risk profile of the case, especially for those higher risk countries, for us to be able to provide you with the right questions, the right answers in order to progress to a full application stage. It is key for us to understand the use of the property. So say, for example, if somebody's buying a property for family members to live in, it's not something at this stage that we could help out with, unless, of course, the transaction is in a limited company structure. Then we will review that further forward with yourselves. Now, for sources of deposit, so if any of the deposit for a purchase is coming from an overseas account or is being gifted from overseas citizens, there's some information that we need to receive from yourselves via your account manager to consider further. So we need details on when, how the deposit was built, with bank statements to support where required. And if gifted, we need to understand the relationship between the applicant and the donor, and details of the residency and nationality, again, of the donor. It needs to make sense for ourselves, but we are comfortable with gifted deposits. Now I'm going to pass you over to my colleagues, Hannah Reid and David Spruce, who's going to go through information on how to package your cases, hear it together to make sure that you can get a speedy underwrite. So over to Hannah, first of all, please.
Morning, everyone. So as Michelle said, I'm Hannah and I'm one of the senior underwriters here. So I'm going to talk to you about the packaging requirements that we need in relation to overseas nationals. Obviously, with overseas nationals, they are more high risk, so we always do more due diligence on these type of cases to manage the risk to the business, as Rachel will go into further detail later. So the key things that we require on submission, so we need proof of ID and proof of address that need to be certified by a solicitor or a notary, along with the solicitor's witness certificate, source of deposit, permanent rights to reside or EU settled status, and a UK bank account. So in relation to proof of ID and proof of address, the main documents that we accept are passport, driving licence, utility bill, council tax bill or bank statement. They need to be within the last 3 months, and as I've said, need to be certified by a solicitor or notary. And for right to reside, we need to see a copy of the front and back, which needs to be in date and also certified. So for source of deposit, we do need this information day one, and the deposit form needs to be provided, which I will now pass over to David Spruce, who will go into further detail regarding this.
This is one of the forms to help you package your cases easily. I'm just going to go through the form just to sort of clarify what we need on there to sort of help the underwriters understand on day one what the situation is. So in the top left hand corner, you can see that it says please confirm how the deposit funds will be provided. So a lot of the times we get savings what we'd like you to do is explain further where the savings came from. So it may be, although they're in the savings account now, they may have come from different avenues, so business or gift, etc. So the first section is really just to clarify where the deposit funds have come from. There's a section on gifted deposits and about the gifter's nationality. Sometimes we get a different sort of confirmation when the report on title comes over, or the COT, as some of you may call it, and that's really why we want this on day one, so that we can sort of help you sort of get a speedy journey with Together and a quicker completion process. So if that could be completed and checked on day one, that will really help deliver speed. And then the last part is with regards to any additional finance that they may be taking out to assist with the purchase. So basically, if they're taking out an unsecured loan or a secured loan, etc., this form is really helpful to sort of identify the full situation on day one. The form is available on My Broker Venue in its entirety. It's also together on togethermoney.com. So togethermoney.com is where we host a lot of our additional support tools. It allows us to update really quickly and add anything in that may be needed ad hoc. So I'm sure the link will be sent around after the meeting. So as Hannah said, we need ID and residency for anybody looking to purchase properties overseas, and we'd like that on day one, so we can sort of again see where we're up to on day one, sort of see where we're up to with the client, where they're from, get it referred on day one to save time for the journey. Notaries, some of you may not be as familiar with notaries, but it is as simple as putting it into Google, notary for whichever country they reside in, and they'll give you a list of notaries. And then literally, as Hannah said, get the solicitors to witness form off My Broker Venue, ID and residency. They go there, they witness the documents, and that can be provided. Also, they'll need a UK solicitor, so depending on where the security is, made in English and Welsh solicitor or a Scottish solicitor, but that accompanies the documentation that we'll need on day one.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, both. So again, if you've got any questions regarding packaging, please raise those through the chat section, and then we can cover this at the end of Rachel's slides. So next I'm moving on to Rachel Tideswell. As I mentioned, she's a senior financial crime manager here at Together, and she's going to go through information that's required in order to evidence the plausibility of your application to get a smooth journey with ourselves here Together. So over to Rachel.
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm responsible for the first line financial crime team here at Together. When Michelle asked me to be part of this webinar today, I was really excited about it. It's really great to be able to provide some context around what we do in terms of the information, etc., and documents that we request. As rather than just saying what we need, it's great to share with you to understand why we need it as well. I do totally understand that FC can be a bit of frustration sometimes in your industry, but hopefully I'm here to provide some context, information and a bit of clarity for you, and hopefully share some useful tips as well on what to look for in terms of protecting your business and also to protect us as well, and to ultimately ensure that we get things right first time for the customer. Again, as you probably are all regulated individuals yourself and are also subject to money laundering regs, a lot of you may already know a lot of the information that I'm going to share today. But hopefully there might be bits of useful information that you can take away from the session. And if all else fails, you can put a face to what's normally a non-customer facing team, i.e. the financial crime department, obviously here at Together, albeit there are a number of us, but it's obviously just my face that you've got today. So let me launch in then to what it is we need and why. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I was muted then. So for information around why certain jurisdictions can be classified as high risk, it's quite simple really. So it pretty much derives from deficiencies around certain things to do with money laundering, or controls around tax evasion, bribery and corruption and sanctions. A lot of these factors are determined by industry bodies such as the Financial Action Task Force and also Transparency International. So when we define who is classed as kind of a high-risk jurisdiction, it isn't kind of finger in the air we're going to choose. It does actually come from, global industry bodies that can be sometimes government-backed or approved by the government. There are a number of factors that can actually influence what kind of determines a country's risk rating, and it tends to be the things that you would probably imagine. So things around sanctions regimes, civil and political instability or unrest is quite a common one. Countries that are at higher risk for funding terrorism as well, or have terrorist organisations on their territories. Obviously, you've probably seen over maybe the last 10 to 15 years a lot more sanctions in place, due to issues like Al-Qaeda, etc. So a lot of those will be influenced as well. The primary one is deficiencies, obviously, in their anti-money laundering controls. And again, as mentioned earlier, they are normally governed by bodies that determine, how strong or robust a country's money laundering controls are. And again, a significant level of corruption as well. So again, kind of links into with the political instability and also the lack of controls. In terms of a country risk assessment, it's probably quite important to point out that it applies to a number of circumstances and not just residency or nationality. So if part of your application includes some form of high risk element, whether that be the residency, the citizenship, or even things like the place of employment or the source or the origin of funds, then we will probably require that bit more information in the first instance. And as obviously Michelle and David and Hannah have mentioned earlier on in the call, on occasions we do require enhanced due diligence, obviously, if there are higher risk elements to the deal. In addition, offshore lending as well is classed as higher risk because they can often be complex structures. Sometimes it can be, a genuine offshore structure, which is absolutely fine. On occasion, there are some secrecy elements to it. It could be for tax purposes. It could be to, disguise or mask the true beneficial owner. So they're ones normally that we might require a little bit more information on. I guess that the main thing that we get asked is why is evidence required? And I know obviously in your industry you'll be aware of why you need to why we need to request information, but I think it's probably just to give you a little bit more understanding that, from our legal and regulatory obligations, we need to make sure that we're totally comfortable with the deposit, we're totally comfortable with the funds that are going to be funding the loan, just to obviously ensure that we're meeting those obligations. And I think, feedback that I've seen over the years in the industry where people tend to come unstuck with applications can sometimes be around evidencing funds. So at first instance, it can sometimes appear obvious. I think David referenced before, things like savings. It can, if somebody's got a really good job, you can see funds accruing, etc. Savings probably is the source of funds. But from our perspective, sometimes on the back end, without kind of understanding how that's accrued. So it is income bonuses, for example, over a period of years, or it's the regular monthly income and they earn £10,000 a month, or just a little bit more information around, apart from just savings. It's difficult for us to know at first instance. So I'll just give you a little bit about what we would classify constitutes evidence, just to give you some kind of live examples about what we'd expect to make the journey smoother for both you and the customer. So, for example, we get, different sources of deposit, things like the sale of a car or sale of jewellery or gold or high value items, basically. And what we'd normally expect to see in those instances would be some form of receipt or invoice and probably a supporting bank statement. Now, in some instances, a bank statement's great because you can see the funds going in, but if it's a private sale of a high value car, for example, we can't see the reason for the transfer, we can just see the transfer, hence the request for the receipt or the invoice. Again, with the sale of the property, they're quite normally easy to evidence. You would expect it, you know, it's reasonable that someone would have some form of lender or solicitor correspondence. So again, things like that are really helpful for us. Again, employment bonus, pay slips or supported bank statements, which on a lot of applications would kind of be captured anyway, but in certain parts of our criteria, we might not necessarily capture income information. So it might well be that, you know, we just need that. We might need to touch base, even if it's self-funding, for example, we might just need that to support the source of deposit or the source of actually the repayments on the loan. And then again, finally, with savings, I think it's always a difficult one, because I know David mentioned before about making sure that the information that we get from day one is as clear or you know, as much as possible that you have at that point. You know, from my perspective and my team's perspective, we absolutely hate it when it gets to the day of funding, as I'm sure you do, and there's been a change of something in the application, and we're all kind of speeding to get that turned over as quickly as possible for our customer. So as much information that you have on day one around, for example, the source of deposit, please obviously share that with us. With the savings element, as I've discussed, savings itself isn't an actual source. There would be something behind the savings. So please provide that on your report on title or your COT, so that we've got that information early on in the day. And we can do what we need to do in the background so that it doesn't impact your application or ultimately the completion date. And then moving on to gifted deposits. So again, these are quite popular. We see gifted deposits. You get obviously people wanting to help the family and friends start out in business, which is fantastic. I wish there was someone helping me out with a gifted deposit, but they're absolutely obviously fantastic to get somebody on the ladder and to get them into that, you know, commercial properties, etc. The one thing that we sometimes do struggle with is the information behind a gifted deposit, and getting it right first time for us is really, really important. So we want to ensure that we can effectively view your applications at day one and be as timely as possible. So it's really imperative, and just to stress again, that the information that you give us is right first time, or as much as you possibly have, because in some instances you just don't have it, and we totally get that. So we can obviously use that to work together and get to the right decision as quick as possible. In terms of gifted deposits, things that we would require from, you know, especially high risk gifted deposits, would be a signed letter from the donor that confirms their name, address, date of birth, and the relationship with the borrower. Might sound quite simple, but if it is a higher risk jurisdiction, it might well be that we conduct background checks, and just to make sure there's no politically exposed elements, or, you know, it's not coming from a sanctioned individual or a sanctioned entity. So that's the reason we ask for that information. Again, proof of ID, just to make sure that the information we're being given in terms of name, spelling, etc. is correct. Again, confirmation of the source of funds, just like we would do if it was coming from the customer, because of the higher risk element. And then finally as well, and this isn't a given across all gifted deposits, but if there are some higher risk elements, we may request some evidence or documentation to support that. And it may be that we do that during the application process and maybe not at day one. So I would always advise, if you know there's a higher risk element to it, try and get it at day one, so that we make the customer journey and the journey for you as smooth as possible. If in doubt, I would always say request it, or the main thing you can do is obviously speak to your account manager as well. They can liaise with us, or they have the skills as well to be able to answer those questions. And I think the final bit of information or kind of tips to share to you today, and it's probably the questions that we ask ourselves, and it's probably more of a common sense approach than it is a financial crime specialism. It's around, does a deposit make sense? And by that, we mean around the customer's profile, for example. So there's a couple of things that we would normally ask ourselves, or we would look at in the industry. So things like, is the deposit in line with the applicant's financial profile? So is the information you've been given plausible? You know, could they have plausibly saved X amount of deposit on the income that they're earning? You know, can you evidence a gradual build-up of funds via a bank statement, etc., to support the information you're being given? In terms of the sale of high-value goods that I mentioned earlier, Another question around that is, does it feel like their profile would support those high value goods? So if you've got somebody on £12,000 a year as a barber that sold a Lamborghini, you know, how did they acquire the Lamborghini? Because most likely when it gets to us, we're going to ask the question. So if you're thinking at this stage, you know, day one, does it make sense? Doesn't it? Ask the question. You're not going to be tipping off. You're not going to be, you know, it's just a question we're going to ask down the line. So we definitely say, the mantra is that if you're unable to answer the question or you don't understand the scenario, the likelihood is that we don't. So if we ask the question on day one and not a day of funding, then obviously it makes the smoother journey for everybody. Has the source of deposit changed numerous times? So not that this is a red flag on every deposit, because obviously things can change, circumstances can change, life happens, especially in this economic climate. But does it make sense as to why it's changed? Is it kind of, you know, ringing a little bit of alarm bells as to what's going on, as to why it's changed? And would it amplify any cause of concern? If it does, and something doesn't seem quite right to you, then please reach out to your account manager. Obviously, we can support in the background as well and liaise with your account manager to ask certain questions and to support you if you have concerns. And then again, is the deposit linked to a high-risk jurisdiction? Can you obtain that evidence to support that? Because we, like I say, most likely would require that. And then again, to kind of summarise, does the overall deposit make sense? And as I said earlier, if not, why not? Because normally that can be an indicator. And what questions can you ask to mitigate concerns that you may have at first instance? You know, and I often say it because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're most likely tend to be internal in businesses and we're not really a customer facing team. But, you know, asking questions, even though you're subject to money laundering regs, doesn't constitute tipping off. You need to obviously understand the deal that you're submitting and understand your customer and their, you know, their resources to provide them with that best quality service. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. And again, you know, if you don't understand it, it's very unlikely that we will understand it. So please establish, you know, as much information as you can early on so we can get it right first time. And I'll now hand back to Michelle to obviously ask if you've got any questions, but thank you for your time today.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Now, I think it's quite clear with the information that Rachel's just gone through, we are asking extra questions, but that's because our appetite is so great to support these types of customers from all across the globe. Certain countries we wouldn't say yes to, I'm afraid. Some that don't need discussion around that, but many we certainly will take into consideration subject to the information that you can provide. So there's other lenders out there that, as I mentioned earlier, will restrict which countries that an individual either resides in or is a national from. Whereas for ourselves, we review these cases on its own individual merits. And we don't need somebody to have an existing footprint here in the UK. It could be their first investment here in the UK. So again, they don't need to have an existing investment property or residential property here in the UK for us to consider these type of applicants. But the purpose of Rachel, David and Hannah's sessions is to go through the information that's needed so that we can best support you with these applications, because we've got growing appetite. It's a growing area of business for us here together. And that's pretty much down to the flexibility that we have on our criteria and the support that we can offer you. Having access to Rachel and her team is fantastic for our account managers to kind of pick up the phone, give her a call if something's slightly more complex. But as Rachel mentioned, the team are furnished with the knowledge to be able to answer the majority, if not all of the questions that you would have around this. So on the topic of questions, I'm going to go through to the chat section and I'll be working through with my colleagues to ask some of these questions. First question on there is, will certified docs by a country's bank manager or chartered accountant suffice? So Hannah, David, can I come to you on that one, please?
Hello. Sorry about that. Sorry, I missed the question. Apologies. I was looking at there's two chats. There's a chat for the general chat, and then there's another one, isn't there? So I didn't see that. Apologies. But just repeat the question.
Okay. No worries. So will certified documents by a country's bank manager or chartered accountant suffice?
Not with foreign nationals, because it'll need to be certified by the notary. So the notary is effectively like having a solicitor in England. So they're certifying to say that they are the correct, that they've seen that person and in front of them the original documentation. So no, that wouldn't be suffice, I'm afraid.
Thank you, David. Rachel, a question here for you. Is there a list of countries that you will not accept? So I kind of alluded earlier that there's some countries that we wouldn't consider. Russia is definitely on that list, but one of our brokers here has asked Rachel if the countries such as North Korea, Iran, Iraq, etc., if we'll consider those.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, Michelle, so any country that's sanctioned, unfortunately, we're unable to accept, obviously due to the nature. If there are elements within the deal, depending on where that is, and the circumstances, we do take a pragmatic approach here at Together, and that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on. So there could be elements of it that would be okay. I appreciate this is probably quite a vague answer, because we are pragmatic and we're not a computer says no company, and it does allow us that flexibility. Obviously, if there's clear sanctioned elements to it, we wouldn't obviously be able to support that, but nobody in the industry will be able to support that. If there are extremely high risk elements, we may be able to support that. So I think the best course of advice here would be to liaise with your account manager. They will be, as Michelle said, they're furnished with that information. Or if there's something that's quite specific and it's really, really high risk, then they will liaise with us, and we can obviously review that specific circumstances of the case and obviously provide you with the relevant support.
Thank you for that, Rach. Next question, I'll take this one. Will you allow gifted equity, for example, if there is an inter-family sale? Yes, we can. We just need to understand the story behind it. So just to make sure that it's not a distressed sale, for example, but we certainly do gifted equity. We do this quite a lot. I mean, this isn't linked to this particular subject, but what we're seeing a lot of is landlords who are selling their properties to their tenants and gifting some equity to achieve a quick sale because they've had a long relationship with said tenants. So yes, gifted equity is certainly within our appetite, just needing to understand, as I said, that it's not a distressed sale. Next question, are gifted deposits only allowed from close family members? Either Hannah or David, can I come to you on that one?
Hi, no, we can accept gifted deposits from anyone else other than a family member. However, we just need to establish the relationship, why they're gifting it, and just know a bit more of a background story regarding it. But no, it's not just closed off just to family members, but it just needs to make sense and we need to get comfortable with it.
Fabulous. So again, just evidence of our flexibility for these cases. So David, I'll come to you from a packaging perspective. Many proofs of address are in the language of origins. So what do you need to verify the contents?
Well, sometimes it's tricky, to be honest with you, because obviously there's many different languages, as you're all aware. But we do need them to, from experience, we do need them to sort of clarify in English what it sort of says. I know that people have previously used things like AI and Google Translate and stuff like that to sort of help. So again, I would say, like other things, when you get one that's not in the native, in English, we need to translate, speak to us, and we can sort of best advise at the time. There's no blanket yes or no. It's going to depend on the language. For example, we might have somebody that internally that speaks one of the languages as opposed to a language that nobody speaks. So it might be a case of we just get somebody to verify it internally, but on another occasion we might need to use technology.
Fabulous, thank you. Question here, is it necessary to obtain notary or sole certified ID and proof of address on day one if it's a purchase? Answer to that is no. This can follow at sole stage prior to completion, but of course we will need to see uncertified documents prior to that point so that we can do the necessary screening checks through our systems prior to it going through to solicitor stage. So just one thing to be mindful of is when you're submitting your applications through our system, I know this might sound daft, but I've got fat fingers, so it's quite easy for me to put a date of birth incorrectly when I'm filling in our applications. So just double check things like that when you're sense checking against the customer's ID, making sure that if there's a middle name, for example, that you include said middle name. It's just to make sure that once we do have that full application from yourselves, that when we run the screening checks, it's been run on the correct person. Because again, what could cause a delay is, say, for example, once we receive the report and title, if the information differs, we will need to run through an updated screening check. So just be mindful of that, especially if anybody else has got chunky fingers like me.
Can I just jump in there? Common thing I find when I'm out seeing brokers in their offices is that middle names aren't entered onto my broker venue, or another common one is driving licenses where the origin birth is on there. So I've just given an example, China, for example, but then we don't have the passport or a right to reside, etc. So just double check basically when you're getting that you're filling in MBV right with the right residency, and also it's highlighted that you're putting the full names onto MBV, because it does have an impact.
Fabulous, thank you. In terms of gifted deposits, I'll come to you, Rach, on this one. How much detail / proof do you require to satisfy the source of the funds?
So again, I mean, if there's kind of high risk elements to it, I would address it as if the source of deposit is coming from the customer. So if it makes sense, and obviously everything's in line, and you've got the basic requirements around the name, address, etc., date of birth, the relationship, the reason for the deposit, it might just be that you need to see a simple bank statement of the transfer. If there are extremely high risk elements to it, so they work in a high risk industry in a high risk country, for example, oil in they mine for oil in a jurisdiction that's high risk, Dubai, or wherever that may be, it might be that we need a little bit more information. So again, if it feels high risk to you, and there's a few things as part of the explanation that don't not necessarily make sense, but kind of just need a little bit more to underpin it, I definitely say ask the question. Or again, if you're unsure, please speak to your account manager and they will be able to support you on that. Again, I appreciate that a lot of these answers aren't normally black and white, and that is just to reiterate, because we are pragmatic. And I know Michelle alluded at the beginning of the conversation and the webinar that some institutions will literally just say this fits into a yes box, this fits into a no box, but we want to be able to give you more than that. We want to be able to support you and your customers for things that aren't the kind of typical Square application. So sometimes it does just take that manual check and that manual review from your account manager or us to say, actually, we can support this, but we just might need a little bit extra.
Fabulous. David, does a notary have to be registered with the UK Law Society?
It's again, the easiest way to do it is just to go onto Google and just search the country. So Australia notaries, and you'll get a list there. It's important to just re-clarify. I don't know if I explained this the best before, so I'll just re-clarify. Somebody's living in Australia, they need a notary to witness their documents. They still need a UK solicitor, depending on where the security is, to complete the transaction. So that's basically on every case that needs to go externally via solicitors. So if it's an internal case, they don't need a solicitor, they'll need a notary. So an internal case would be under 300,000, not a purchase, not a limited company case, and it's not a transfer of equity.
Fabulous. Thank you, David. We've got a question regarding rates and fees for overseas clients. We do actually have flexible product cards across our product range for overseas applicants. So I will share that with you for those who don't have access. The information is available via our website, but I will drop yourself an email with that information, because it's great to see the interest, the potential opportunity that we have for the office staff that you've got back there in India. Thank you for that. Question: my client travels to and from the UK regularly. Spruce, David, can a UK solicitor certify the documents?
Yes, they can.
Thank you. So there's another question. Some countries have branches here, such as ICICI, Bank of India. We're asking about branch managers certifying the documents. As we mentioned beforehand, we would need a notary to certify those documents, not bank managers, I'm afraid. Question: could Together establish a web page on which countries are excluded and which are borderline, maybe a traffic light system? Excellent question there, because it's a topic of conversation that we had only last week. We are currently reviewing this so that we can provide you with that information on, as you say, a traffic light system, and that will help guide you, that for those that are very much green light, that you don't need to get in touch with an account manager, because those ones are nice simple ones that should go straight through. But for those that are amber and red, it will indicate, not that necessarily it's a definite no, there will be those that are a definite no, but those that are not a definite no, then it's worthy of a referral through to us. So I will be in touch. We're creating a new tool on our website, a new web page, in fact, that's providing a lot of videos to go through some of our lending criteria, how to package with those documents that's needed, and other help guides. It will be hosted there, but I'll certainly be in touch prior to that site going live.
In the meantime, if you search UK sanctioned countries, the government does provide on their website which countries are currently under sanction. So some of the ones that you've mentioned previously in the questions, that they appear on there. So just see if you need a quick, is this a high risk country, unsure, for example, have a look on there.
Yeah. But as we say, we'll take a pragmatic view to many countries, even if they are high or higher risk. Foreign national, no UK credit history. Yes, that's acceptable. You have asked no UK bank account. We do actually need a UK bank account to be opened up prior to completion for direct debits to be taken from. So that does need to be in place prior to completion of the application with ourselves. But no existing UK footprint is required. So should we refer all overseas national cases across to our account manager first with proof of ID, income details, regardless of the country or higher risk? Furthermore, when keying the cases on MBV, do we still just key the security address as their current address if they don't have a UK address, and upload a doc with a foreign address separately? Yes, well, not necessarily, as I mentioned with referral, because if it's a nice green one, so we'll get that list over to yourselves. If it's something that's very low risk, there's no need for a referral. But your account managers are always, I say always available. They're out and about on the road, but they are here to support you with these types of questions, because again, it's a huge growth area here for us at Together. If you can't get hold of your account manager and you're looking for instant support, we also have a team based up in Cheadle in our main head office. They're a telephony team, and again, after this session is over, I will forward you details with the links of our website that David mentioned earlier, but also with contact points for our telephony team, because they are available Monday to Friday 9 till 5:30 to support with any questions that you may have with this if your account manager is out and about on the road. Generally, though, these cases, especially if it's a higher risk ones, need a bit of thought process into it. So certainly work with your account manager on those. And you are right with regards to my broker venue submission on the case. And again, if anybody needs any support with our online system, please let us know and we can arrange sessions on that. Next question. Some countries and some US states have different rules when it comes to certification. For example, parts of California do not allow the copy of passport to be certified, and it has been done on a separate form. Many UK lenders will not accept this. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, and again, kind of touching back on the pragmatic approach, if there's certain restrictions in certain jurisdictions that don't allow for what we require, we will obviously review that and we'll take that into consideration. So we sometimes, I know we've historically had certification or proof of address issues in relation to females based in some of the countries like Saudi, for example, where it's quite difficult for them to evidence that they've got an address if they've, say, moved with their partner who works there. Again, we will take the approach to understand or look at what we can do around that to support the application. So, you know, in that circumstance, if it is that it isn't physically possible for them to certify the passport because of the regulations there, and we can independently verify behind the scenes that that's the case, then obviously we would look to support that. You know, we wouldn't, you know, kind of turn an application down because the circumstances of that jurisdiction doesn't meet what we require. We would definitely assess that in its own right and look to support that.
Fabulous, thank you. And it looks like we've got one more question. So since Brexit and the associated trade agreement, do you have any issues accepting applicants living in the EU, specifically Italy and Spain? Quick answer to that one, no. So in the same way, you know, they're kind of lower risk, definitely low risk countries for us, but in the same way that we'll assess higher risk countries, it's certainly no challenges with ourselves, whether or not I suppose some countries, they have the restrictions on how much funding can be released from said countries in order to utilize for a source of deposit. So that source of deposit may be reviewed in more details for certain countries on that front, but it doesn't impact us. And that also goes for expats. We're doing a lot of buy-to-lets for expatriates who have moved abroad. So it's not just overseas nationals, it's also expatriates. Again, not necessarily a strict restriction as to where they've moved to for us to consider that application.